The wind howled across the Nordland mountains, carrying fragments of ice that stung Dr. Isabella Vale's face as she carefully brushed away centuries of frozen soil. Her fingers, despite the thermal gloves, had gone numb hours ago, but she couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. "Professor, you need to see this," called out Thomas Reed, her graduate assistant, from several meters away. His voice carried an unusual tremor that made Isabella immediately abandon her current excavation site. The late autumn sun cast long shadows across the archaeological dig, turning the snow-dusted ground into a canvas of purple and gold. As Isabella approached Thomas's position, she noticed the unusual darkness gathering around the edges of what appeared to be a perfectly circular shaft descending into the mountain. "It's not natural," Thomas said, shining his light down the shaft. "The walls are too smooth, too precise." He was right. The cylinder appeared to have been carved with technology that shouldn't have existed in ancient Norway. Isabella pulled out her specialized scanning equipment, a prototype she'd developed specifically for this expedition. The readings made her breath catch in her throat. The energy signatures, they're off the charts. Whatever's down there is still active. Within hours, their small team had established a secure perimeter and begun the delicate process of descent. Isabella insisted on leading the first exploration team herself, despite the protests of Dr. Raj Patel, their safety coordinator. "The reading suggests some form of quantum anomaly," she explained while checking her equipment one final time. "I'm the only one qualified to properly assess what we're dealing with." The shaft descended nearly 100 meters into the mountain before opening into a vast chamber that defied all logical explanation. The walls seemed to absorb their lights rather than reflect them, creating an effect like being suspended in infinite space. At the center stood a simple obsidian pedestal, and upon it, a sphere no larger than a tennis ball that seemed to be made of pure darkness. "Don't touch anything," Isabella warned, though she knew the warning was unnecessary. Everyone on her team was experienced enough to know better. She approached the pedestal slowly, her instruments recording everything. The sphere appeared to be floating slightly above the pedestal's surface, suspended by forces her equipment couldn't fully analyze. Ancient runes were carved into the base, their patterns familiar yet distinctly different from any known Norse writings. "Dr. Vale," called out Dr. Patel, his voice tight with concern. "The temperature is dropping rapidly. We should evacuate until we can bring in more equipment." Isabella knew he was right, but something about the sphere seemed to call to her. The darkness within it shifted like liquid smoke, patterns emerging and dissolving in ways that seemed almost meaningful. She found herself reaching toward it before she even realized what she was doing. "Professor, don't." Thomas's warning came too late. The moment her fingers brushed the sphere's surface, the darkness exploded outward. It wasn't cold as expected, but burning hot, like touching the surface of a star. The energy surge knocked everyone off their feet, and for a moment, Isabella felt her consciousness expanding, touching something vast and ancient and utterly alien. When her vision cleared, the sphere had changed. Where before it had been opaque, now it pulsed with an inner light that seemed to drink in the darkness around it. More concerning were the tendrils of black energy that had begun to spread across the chamber floor like living shadows. "Everyone out. Now!" Isabella commanded, her voice hoarse. As they scrambled toward the shaft, she noticed strange symbols appearing on her skin where she'd touched the sphere, glowing with the same dark light. They barely made it to the surface before the ground began to shake. The entire mountain seemed to tremble, and in the distance, strange lights began to appear in the sky. Isabella watched in horror as the northern lights above them turned from their natural colors to sheets of darkness that rippled across the heavens. "What have we awakened?" Thomas whispered, voicing the fear they all shared. Isabella looked down at her hand, where the strange symbols continued to spread slowly up her arm. She could feel something stirring in the back of her mind, like a presence testing the boundaries of her consciousness. "Not what," she corrected grimly. "Who?" That night, As emergency protocols were enacted and government agencies began to descend upon their site, Isabella sat in her tent, transcribing the runes from the pedestal. Her hand trembled as she worked, partly from exhaustion, partly from the strange energy she could feel coursing through her veins. The translations were fragmentary, but what she could decipher chilled her to the bone. Herein lies bound the flame of night, the void's heart, sealed by the blood of 7 sages. Let none break this seal, lest darkness walk again among the realms of light. Outside, the darkened aurora continued to spread across the sky, and in the distance, dogs began to howl. Isabella knew, with a certainty that transcended scientific rationality, that they had just set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. The question now was whether humanity was ready for what came next. As she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams were filled with visions of ancient battles and powers beyond comprehension. And somewhere, in the depths of her consciousness, something answered. 3 days after the incident, the research base camp had transformed into a military installation. Black helicopters and armored vehicles surrounded the excavation site, while soldiers in specialized gear patrolled the perimeter. The darkness in the sky had spread, now covering most of northern Norway in an artificial twilight that refused to lift. Isabella sat in the makeshift laboratory, surrounded by monitors displaying increasingly concerning data. The markings on her arm had spread past her shoulder, forming intricate patterns that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. More disturbing were the whispers she heard in the quiet moments, ancient words in languages that had never existed in human history. The energy readings are still climbing, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Hayes reported, placing a tablet in front of her. His weathered face betrayed no emotion, but the tension in his shoulders told her enough. We've had to evacuate 3 more villages. People are reporting strange phenomena, shadows moving independently, electronic devices failing, and what? Isabella pressed, though she already knew. She'd seen it in her dreams. People are changing, Hayes finished. Some of them are developing markings similar to yours. Others are experiencing what they describe as visions. We've had to establish quarantine zones. Isabella stood, walking to the window. The darkness above seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. It's searching, she said quietly. The entity we released, it's looking for something. Or someone. The door burst open as Thomas rushed in, his usual composed demeanor shattered. Professor, you need to see this. He pulled up footage on the main screen, showing a small Norwegian town about 50 kilometers from their location. The video quality was poor, distorted by static, but what they could see made Isabella's blood run cold. People were walking through the streets with black flames dancing across their skin, their eyes gleaming with the same dark light that pulsed within the sphere. They moved in perfect synchronization, like puppets controlled by an unseen hand. It's happening faster than I calculated, Isabella muttered, pulling up her research notes. The entity isn't just affecting the environment, it's actively seeking hosts. But why? What's its purpose? Hayes moved closer, lowering his voice. Dr. Vale, the Joint Chiefs are considering more permanent containment options. If we can't find a way to stop this spread within the next 48 hours, they're prepared to take extreme measures. The implications were clear. Isabella felt the presence in her mind stir at the threat, and for a moment, the shadows in the room deepened. We need more time. There's something we're missing, something in the runes, in the history. This entity wasn't just sealed away, it was imprisoned for a reason. Dr. Vale, Thomas interrupted, his voice shaking. Your arm. Isabella looked down to see the markings on her skin glowing with intense dark light. The whispers in her mind grew louder, and suddenly she could understand them. Images flooded her consciousness, vast cosmic wars fought before Earth had cooled, beings of pure energy battling across dimensions, and a terrible choice made by beings who called themselves the Guardians. She gasped as the vision released her, nearly falling before Hayes caught her arm. I know what it is, she whispered. It's not just an entity, it's a key. The ancients sealed it away because it's the only thing capable of opening the barriers between dimensions. And it's not trying to possess people, it's trying to transform them. To make them into living bridges. Before she could explain further, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the glow of emergency systems and the pulsing patterns on Isabella's skin. Multiple breaches reported, a voice crackled over the radio. The quarantine zones, they're all failing simultaneously. The infected are converging on our location. Through the window, Isabella watched as dark figures emerged from the tree line, moving with inhuman grace. Black flames danced around them, and their eyes burned with familiar light. But what truly terrified her was the realization that she could feel them, could sense their consciousness linking together into something vast and terrible. The presence in her mind surged forward, and this time she couldn't push it back. As darkness crept into the edges of her vision, Isabella turned to Hayes and Thomas. "Lock me up," she commanded. "Whatever happens, whatever I say, don't let me near that sphere. Because I finally understand, I'm not just infected. I'm being prepared. It chose me from the moment I touched it, and if it succeeds in taking me completely." She never finished the sentence. The darkness swept over her consciousness like a tide, and the last thing she heard before the void claimed her was Thomas shouting her name and the sound of boots running down the corridor. Above them, the darkened sky began to crack, revealing something vast and ancient stirring in the spaces between realities. The true battle for Earth's future was about to begin, and humanity's best chance of survival now lay in understanding an entity older than time itself, before it was too late. The containment chamber was a marvel of modern engineering, its walls lined with experimental quantum dampeners and reinforced with materials designed to contain nuclear reactions. For 3 days, it had been Isabella's prison, and humanity's best defense against what she was becoming. Through the observation window, Thomas watched his mentor pace. The markings now covered most of her body, creating patterns that seemed to tell a story he couldn't read. More disturbing was how shadows bent toward her, like iron filings drawn to a magnet. "The translations are complete," Dr. Nikolai Volkov announced, spreading ancient texts across the monitoring station. The Russian archaeologist had arrived 2 days ago, bringing with him documents from sealed Vatican archives. The entity wasn't just imprisoned by the ancients, it was fractured. The sphere we found was only one of 7. Commander Hayes leaned over the documents, his face illuminated by the strange darkness that now covered most of Scandinavia. "Where are the others?" "Scattered," Nikolai replied. "Hidden in places of power across the world. But that's not the most concerning part." He pointed to a particular passage. "The spheres weren't meant to be separated forever. According to this, they're drawn to each other. By activating one. We've started a chain reaction," Thomas finished, watching as Isabella suddenly stopped pacing and turned toward them. Even through the reinforced glass, her eyes blazed with otherworldly power. Inside the chamber, Isabella fought against the entity's growing influence. The knowledge it had shared was overwhelming, visions of cosmic wars and ancient beings that treated galaxies like game pieces. But mixed with these memories was something else, a deep, ancient purpose that threatened everything she held dear. "They're coming," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the observation equipment crackle. "I can feel them awakening. The other fragments, they're calling to each other." As if in response to her words, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Hayes grabbed his tablet, face growing pale as he read the incoming reports. "We're getting reports of similar phenomena appearing globally. Rio de Janeiro, Cairo, Tibet, Easter Island. The other containment sites," Nikolai breathed. "The ancients built their temples over them, trying to keep them dormant." Isabella pressed her hand against the chamber wall, and for a moment, the darkness around her took shape, massive wings of void stuff that seemed to drink in light itself. "You don't understand. The fragments aren't just awakening. They're remembering. What you found, what I touched, it's not just sentient. It's part of something that existed before your universe took shape. Thomas noticed she had said, your universe, not our. The Isabella he knew was slipping away, being replaced by something else. Something older. The infected populations are moving, Hayes reported grimly. All of them, worldwide. They're converging on the containment sites. It's like they're being called. They are, Isabella said. Her voice had grown stronger, more resonant. The fragments are choosing their vessels, preparing for the reunion. Just as I was chosen. She turned to face them fully, and Thomas gasped. Her eyes had become pools of swirling darkness, like looking into the heart of a black hole. The others who were marked, they're not strong enough to contain the power. They're being transformed into conduits, living channels for the energy to flow through. But I. She paused, fighting against something they couldn't see. I was meant for more. The fragment recognized something in my research, in my understanding of quantum mechanics. It chose me to be its voice. Nikolai frantically searched through his documents. Here. The prophecy speaks of this, 7 fragments, 7 vessels, 7 gates. But one shall rise above, the speaker of the void, through whom the truth shall be known. Isabella's laughter echoed strangely in the chamber. Truth? Yes, there is a truth you need to understand. What you call the black flame, it's not your enemy. It's your salvation. The lights throughout the facility flickered as she spoke, and the darkness around her grew deeper. Your universe is dying. Has been dying since its birth. What the ancients found, what they tried to contain, was a power meant to remake reality itself. To save everything by breaking down the barriers between what is and what could be. Hayes stepped closer to the glass. And the price of this salvation? Change, Isabella whispered, but her voice carried to every corner of the room. Humanity would transcend its current form. Evolution on a cosmic scale. The ancients feared this change, so they trapped us, fractured us, scattered us across your world. Us? Thomas asked, dreading the answer. Isabella's smile was both terrible and beautiful. I understand now. I am no longer just Isabella Vale. I am becoming what I was always meant to be, a bridge between what is human and what lies beyond. And I am not alone. The facility's sensors suddenly went crazy as energy readings spiked across the globe. In 6 different locations, pillars of darkness pierced the sky. The other fragments had awakened. You have a choice to make, Isabella announced, her voice now layered with others, speaking in tongues that had never been meant for human ears. You can try to stop us, to maintain your comfortable illusions of reality. Or you can help us save everything, at the cost of everything you think you are. As if to punctuate her words, the quantum dampeners in her chamber began to fail, darkness seeping through like water through cracks in a dam. The time for preparation was over. Now, humanity would have to choose, resist the change and face extinction, or embrace it and become something entirely new. Thomas looked at Hayes, then at Nikolai, seeing his own fear and uncertainty reflected in their eyes. Outside, the sky continued to darken, and in the distance, they could hear the approach of thousands of transformed humans, all converging on their location. The final phase was about to begin. The world burned in waves of darkness. Across 6 continents, pillars of void energy pierced the heavens, each surrounded by thousands of transformed humans. Military forces that tried to intervene found their weapons useless against beings that could shift between states of matter at will. The age of ordinary humanity was ending, one city at a time. In Norway, Thomas watched through reinforced bunker windows as the transformed masses surrounded their facility. Their skin rippled with dark energy, eyes gleaming with ancient knowledge. At their center, Isabella floated several feet above the ground, the darkness around her taking shape into vast, impossible geometries. The final fragment is awakening, she announced, her voice carrying impossible harmonics. The time of convergence approaches. Commander Hayes stood at the facility's central command center, surrounded by screens showing global chaos. "We've lost contact with the Cairo site," he reported grimly. "The entire city is dark. Satellite imagery shows changes in the local geography. Reality itself seems to be breaking down." Dr. Volkov burst into the room, clutching ancient papers with trembling hands. "I've finished the final translations. The ancients didn't just fear the entity's power, they feared its purpose. The salvation it offers, it's not just transformation. It's complete dimensional reconstruction." "Explain," Hayes demanded, even as the facility's walls groaned under increasing pressure. "The entity exists across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Its help involves breaking down the barriers between realities, merging them into something new." "But the process?" Nikolai's voice cracked. "The process would unmake everything we know. Physics, chemistry, biology, all would be rewritten. What emerges would be neither our world or theirs, but something entirely new." Thomas looked back at Isabella, or what had once been Isabella. She had become something magnificent and terrible, a being of pure energy barely contained within a human form. The markings on her skin had evolved into flowing scripts that wrote and rewrote the laws of physics in real time. "We can't let this happen," Hayes decided, inputting commands into the facility's mainframe. "Better to die as humans than survive as, whatever this would make us." But Thomas wasn't so sure. Through his grief for the mentor he had lost, he recognized something in Isabella's transformed state, not just power, but understanding. She had seen something out there in the void, something that had convinced her this was necessary. The facility's sensors screamed as reality began to warp. The other fragments were approaching, drawn inexorably toward their final reunion. Each brought with it a tide of transformed humans, their consciousness linked into a vast network that stretched across the globe. "Your weapons cannot stop this," Isabella's voice resonated through their minds. "Your science cannot prevent it. What comes now was written into the fabric of reality at the moment of creation. We are the key, the lock, and the door itself." The transformed masses began to move in perfect synchronization, forming complex patterns on the ground that seemed to twist in impossible ways. The air itself began to crack, showing glimpses of other dimensions, realities where the laws of physics had evolved along different paths. "Wait," Thomas called out, stepping forward despite Hayes's attempt to stop him. Before we lose you completely, I need to know." The Isabella the first knew, the scientist, the mentor, my friend. Is she still in there somewhere? The being that had been Isabella turned its cosmic gaze upon him. For a moment, the swirling void in her eyes cleared, showing something achingly human. "I am here, Thomas. I am more than I was, but I haven't lost who I am. I've simply understood a greater truth. Our universe is a beautiful accident, but it's flawed, unstable. What we're doing isn't destruction, it's healing. By unmaking everything we are," Hayes demanded. "By allowing everything to become what it was always meant to be," Isabella corrected. "The barriers between dimensions were never meant to be permanent. They're like a bandage over a wound in reality itself. We're not destroying the patient by removing the bandage, we're finally allowing it to heal properly." The sky above had become a kaleidoscope of impossibility, showing glimpses of other worlds, other possibilities. The transformed humans began to rise into the air, their bodies becoming conduits for energies that defied comprehension. "The choice is still yours," Isabella offered, extending a hand that seemed to contain galaxies. "You can face this change with fear, or you can embrace it with understanding. The human race won't end, it will transcend. Every consciousness will remain intact, but expanded, enlightened, connected to something greater than itself." Thomas looked at Hayes, at Nikolai, at the facility that had become humanity's last desperate stand against cosmic forces beyond their comprehension. In the distance, the other fragments approached like dark stars, each bringing with it a tide of transformed humans and warped reality. The moment of final convergence was approaching. Soon, the choice would be made, not just for them, but for every living being on Earth. The question wasn't whether change would come, but how they would face it when it did. Above them, the sky continued to crack, showing the true face of reality, not a single universe, but an infinite array of possibilities, all waiting to be unified into something new. Something that had been trying to birth itself since the beginning of time. The 7 fragments of the cosmic entity hung in the sky like dark suns, their power warping the fabric of reality. The transformed masses had formed a vast geometric pattern across the Norwegian landscape, their bodies channels for energies that defied comprehension. At the center of it all, Isabella Vale, or what she had become, prepared for the final convergence. Thomas stood at the threshold of the facility's entrance, watching the impossible unfold. Behind him, Commander Hayes and Dr. Volkov worked frantically to coordinate with what remained of the world's governments. But they all knew it was too late for conventional responses. "The barriers are nearly gone," Isabella announced, her voice carrying echoes of infinite other voices. "Look, Thomas. Look at what we really are." The sky shattered like glass, revealing the true nature of reality. Thomas gasped as he saw universes nested within universes, dimensions folding through each other in patterns that his human mind struggled to comprehend. Everything they had known was just the surface of something far more vast and complex. "Your quantum research," Isabella continued, turning to face him. "You were so close to understanding. Reality isn't a single thread, it's an infinite tapestry. And it's fraying. What you see as destruction is really reconstruction." The other fragments began to move, drawing closer. Each brought with it a tide of transformed humans, their consciousness linked into something greater than the sum of its parts. The air crackled with potential, with possibility. "Last chance," Hayes called out, his finger hovering over what they all knew was a futile failsafe. "We can still try to." "No," Thomas interrupted, finally understanding. "We can't fight this. Not because we're not strong enough, but because it's not something to fight against." He turned to face Hayes and Nikolai. "Look at what's happening. Really look. The transformed aren't being destroyed, they're being elevated. Connected. This isn't an invasion, it's an evolution." As if in response to his words, the fragments pulsed with new energy. The transformed humans began to glow, their bodies becoming transparent, showing the cosmic energy that flowed through them. They were becoming something new, not quite human, not quite energy, but a bridge between states of being. Isabella floated down to stand before Thomas. Through the swirling void of her eyes, he could still see traces of his mentor, his friend. "You understand now," she said softly. "Why I accepted this. Why it had to be this way." "The universe is dying," Thomas replied, remembering her earlier words. "But not just our universe, all of them." The barriers between dimensions were like walls in a burning building, keeping the fire contained but also preventing escape. "Yes," Isabella smiled, and in that smile was both the wisdom of ages and the warmth he remembered. "And now it's time to tear down those walls. Not to destroy, but to rebuild. To allow all of reality to flow together, to heal, to become what it was always meant to be." The fragments began their final approach, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Reality rippled like water, showing glimpses of other worlds, other possibilities. The transformed humans rose into the air, their bodies becoming pure light. "Make your choice," Isabella said, extending her hand to Thomas. "Not just for yourself, but for all that you are, all that you could be. The change comes regardless, but how we face it, that choice remains ours." Thomas looked back at Hayes and Nikolai, saw the fear and wonder warring in their eyes. Then he looked up at the shattered sky, at the infinite possibilities it revealed. He thought about humanity, its struggles, its triumphs, its endless capacity for adaptation and growth. We're not losing ourselves, he realized aloud. We're becoming everything we were capable of being. He reached out and took Isabella's hand. The touch was like connecting to every consciousness that had ever existed or would exist. He felt his awareness expand, touching minds across dimensions, across time itself. He understood then what Isabella had understood, that this was not an ending, but a metamorphosis. The fragments converged in a silent explosion of possibility. Reality reshaped itself, not destroying what had been but transforming it into something greater. Every human consciousness remained intact but expanded, connected to a vast network of being that transcended traditional concepts of existence. What emerged was neither purely human nor purely cosmic, but something new, a synthesis of all possibilities, all potentials. The universe hadn't ended, it had evolved, taking its inhabitants with it into a new stage of existence. And somewhere in the infinite tapestry of the new reality, Thomas felt Isabella's presence, still recognizable, still herself, but part of something far greater. They had not lost their humanity, they had transcended it, becoming part of a cosmic dance that had been waiting since the beginning of time for consciousness to evolve enough to join it. The black flame had not been a destroyer after all, but a catalyst, the key to unlocking humanity's ultimate potential. In the end, the power that could not be tamed had not needed to be tamed at all. It had needed to be understood, accepted, and embraced. And in that embrace, everything changed, and nothing was lost. The story of humanity didn't end, it simply opened to a new chapter, written in the language of stars and possibility, in a book that would never truly end.